Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Nikita, a psychotherapist in Toronto, and this is a channel where we talk about diversity, inclusion in the lives of BIPOC individuals, both in literature and in real life. So you can expect videos on book recommendations, book chats, as well as my podcast called Brown People Problems. So for today's video, I wanted to share some books by BIPOC authors that are on my TBR list. Some of these I've had for some time, some of these are recent additions, but just some books that I haven't gotten to yet. Some of them have a lot of hype around them. Some of them I just kind of picked them up on a whim, and I'm looking forward to reading these. So very first on the list, I have this book here called Sari Not Sari by Singh. She is a fellow Canadian. She lives in Toronto as well. And I've kind of seen this book around, but I sort of just picked it up on a whim because it sounds really nice. But this is a story basically about a young South Asian female CEO of a company called Breakup, where she helps people, I guess, process and work through their breakups. And she has a really successful business, but she's really quite disconnected from her South Asian roots and from her cultural heritage. So eventually, I guess she runs into a client who decides to give her lessons in how to be Indian so she can navigate, I guess, the wedding season, or she can navigate things a little bit well. And I think what sort of follows is a lot of love, a lot of drama. But what I really love about the premise of this book is that it really kind of follows this whole idea of cultural disconnection, navigating dual cultural identities, because here we have a protagonist who's quite sort of, Americanized, and who's looking to get back in touch with her Indian roots. So I love that this talks about that, and it talks about rediscovering cultural identity at a later part in life, and what that looks like for women of color, because for a lot of South Asian communities that live outside of their countries of origin, there can be a lot of pressure to fit into the Western community. There can be a lot of shame that comes with being brown or being too brown. So I'm expecting that this book is gonna, in a humorous way, really talk about some of those narratives and how they exist. Okay, next on the list is a book that I don't have a physical copy of, but this is a book called Well-Behaved Indian Women by Soumya Dave. I've only recently heard of it because Lily Singh started her own book club. I think it's called Lily's Reads, but I'll sort of link it down below, and it sounds really great, and I don't know too much about it, but she's reading it for January for her book club, and whatever premise I have read of this book, it sounds right up my alley. The story, as I understand it, follows South Asian women who are, I believe, Indo-American, follows 3 generations of women in a family. So the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter, and how they kind of navigate these roles of being women in their families and being mothers, and how they navigate that and how they pursue their own dreams. So I'm expecting a lot of character development. I'm expecting a lot of challenging of like the cultural narrative. I am expecting a lot of humor as well. So far, everything that I have heard about this book seems really good. I won't lie, some of these books, I also like to not know too much going into them. Sometimes I just like to be surprised. I don't want to have too solid of an idea of what I'm going into, and that works out usually really well because I don't have any set of expectations when I go into a book, so I'm usually pleasantly surprised. It's been really rare that I have been really disappointed in a book. But I'm looking forward to this because it has everything that I like. It has female voices, it has women of color, it has South Asian women, it has this whole narrative around unpacking like female experiences in our communities. It has this narrative of exploring, women's dreams, women's passions, women's desires. And this multi-generational aspect is really cool. I haven't read too many books where that really is the focus. So I'm really looking forward to reading more about how as each of these characters evolve in their journeys of being a woman and being a mother and being a grandmother, how that really kind of impacts how they show up in the world and in their relationships. Okay, so the next book I have here, it's actually on my Kobo. This is called Funny in Farsi, a memoir of growing up Iranian in America by Feroze Dumas. This is another book that I just sort of bought on a whim. I think it was on a Kobo sale recently, and it's supposed to be very sort of heartfelt, very humorous, and still very real, in where it kind of follows your protagonist, this Iranian woman who I believe immigrates to the States at the age of 6 or 7, really quite young in her life, and I believe California specifically. And it's about her and her family really sort of navigating to this culture shock in very different ways. I believe the mom doesn't sort of really bother learning English too well, maybe as a form of sort of like rebellion. And her father is really quite into the American culture. Her uncle is not. And she herself, I think, goes on to change her name to Julie. And I'm assuming feels a little bit disconnected from her cultural roots. And it seems at some point she meets a French man and they have a relationship. And then they really are this like melting pot of different cultures within their relationship. So it has a lot of threads and a lot of themes that I really enjoy. Obviously the immigration narrative, cultural identity piece. It really seems like, you know, with changing of her name, there's something to be said about disowning a part of us, right? Which is really common, I think. A lot of us anglicize our name or change our names to fit into the new culture, into like the Western community, which can be a form of self-abandonment if we really think about it. And so I'm really looking forward to kind of reading this and seeing what her experience is like. I don't know too much about the Iranian culture. In my personal life, I haven't met many people who identify as Iranian and who have either been first generation Canadian or been immigrants. So I'm really looking for like a new perspective, because I'm sure, as you can tell, I read a lot of books from the perspective of South Asian women. That's my favorite niche. So this will be a nice little change and something to add to my repertoire. Okay, next up after this is another book which I don't have physically with me or on my Kobo, but this is called At Least You Have Your Health by Maddie Sinha, I believe. And this was another Lily's book club pick. I believe this was the book club pick for December. So it's been on my list for quite some time, like a couple months, but I haven't gotten around to grabbing it. And as I understand it, it's a story about a South Asian gynecologist somewhere in the States who's really sort of this like powerhouse of just like productivity, and she's a super mom, and I believe she has like 3 kids, and she's doing, you know, her best to be a great physician for her patients and a great mom for her kids at home. And I believe something sort of happens in her life where she loses her job and she's finding, you know, this like identity crisis that comes up for her. She eventually gets offered a position to be part of this like boutique clinic service, I guess, that caters to like the wealthy women. And she accepts it, and I think the book is sort of just about her navigating the privilege, the inequity in healthcare, and women's health. That seems to be this common thread. And we know that women's health is such a broad topic because the experiences of healthcare differ for white women, and they differ for women of color broadly, drastically. So I'm under the impression that this book sheds a lot of light on that, again in a way that is quite like satirical maybe and humorous, but still packs in a lot of really sort of powerful ideas. Some of the reviews that I've read about this book, people have described it as funny, as very relatable, as very empowering. So I'm really looking forward to reading this one, because I don't think there's a lot out there in literature or in fiction that talks about women's health issues, or South Asian women's health issues. So I'm looking forward to this focus. Okay, next up on my list is a book that I do have here physically. This is called The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters by Bali Kaur Jaswal. I have read the erotic stories for Punjabi women, Punjabi widows, or erotic stories for Punjabi widows by the same author, and that was probably one of the best books that I read last year in 2022. So I have actually had this, I even started this on chapter 3. I've had this for some time sitting on my shelf, but this just sounds really lovely. This story follows 3 sisters who are first generation British, and they're South Asian, but they're first generation British, and they're quite estranged, it seems. They're not very close, and they're very different from one another. So I believe like one is a mom, one is a cosmetologist, and one is I believe in acting, but they're really quite different from one another, and what brings them together is their mother's passing. When their mother passes, her last wish on her deathbed is for her 3 daughters to make a pilgrimage to India to perform her final rites. And so I guess these 3 sisters sort of feel like duty bound to do that, maybe like a little bit guilt tripped, and so they come together and they journey to India. And this book is, I've heard really quite humorous, again, quite satirical. 3 strong female protagonists. It's about sisterhood. It's about discovering your roots, discovering your cultural identity, finding, that place that we fit in with our cultural values, because they can look different for all of us. And I'm really looking forward to reading this. Someone also commented when I was looking up this book, they said this book really focuses also on the travel experience, but from a female perspective, so what it's like to travel in India as a brown woman, because we know that experience is very different than it is for a man. So it has a lot of different themes and threads that I'm looking forward to exploring, and again, it feels like a quick read. It's not too long, but I'm hoping it's just as good as the Punjabi Widows one, because that book was really funny, but also a tearjerker, and again had a huge social message. So I'm hoping this one does too. The next book that I have on my list is not by a South Asian female author. This is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a book that is everywhere right now. I honestly only bought this because I've seen this everywhere. I have seen Twinkle Khanna talk about it. I believe Sonali Bainbridge also has her own book club, and she's been talking about it. She's actually been reading some of the other books by this author as well. So some of the people whose recommendations I really trust, they've been talking about it. So I just went to Indigo last month, and they were having this massive sale on all the hardbacks, and I picked it up. And I'm quite excited to read it. I don't particularly feel like a huge pull towards this. The premise sounds interesting. So this is a story about a cafe in Japan that people go to, which allows you to time travel. So I think the idea is you have limited amount to go back to your past and change something. And I think the story follows a bunch of different characters and what sort of decisions they make and what their regrets are. I don't think this is sci-fi heavy. I don't think this is a huge focus on how the time travel happens and what is the physics and the science behind it. I think it's more sort of philosophical, where if you had the opportunity to go back in time and change something, what would you change? That's my understanding of it as of right now. And it really seems like it has a large focus on human relationships, what it means to be human, navigating life transitions, life decisions, and really a huge focus on the human experience. So I'm quite excited to read it. I'm hoping to get to it this month, but if this is good, I'm gonna pick up the next one. There's another version. There's I think a sequel or a prequel to this. I'm not sure. But I have heard mixed reviews about this. I've heard some people really love it, but I have also heard that some people are just like really disappointed, like it fell flat for them, it didn't do anything for them. And I can see that, because I think you need to be in a certain mood to read books that are quite thought-provoking and philosophical. At least for me, sometimes I'm in a mood to just read like rom-coms, like books that I can just like binge, that don't have too much substance, that can just offer a good distraction. Sometimes there's moods when I want something really thought-provoking. I want something that's really sort of existential, you know. So I'm gonna wait till I'm in the right headspace to pick up this book, but I will report back on how it is. The next book I have here, and this is the last one, is called The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid. This is the same author who wrote Exit West, and don't quote me on this, but I believe he is Canadian. But I'd heard so much about Exit West, and I just never got around to picking it up. And I recently saw this. This is his new book called The Last White Man, and the premise just seems so intriguing. So I'm very excited for this. But basically, the way that I understand it, a man, I'm assuming it's a white man, basically one day wakes up to find out that his skin is dark and his appearance is completely changed. And the same phenomena is happening to others around the world, where they're waking up with sort of this like reincarnation and a totally different identity. So as you can imagine, now people who have been historically really privileged in society now have to navigate the same world from a totally different place. So I'm really kind of assuming this is going to really highlight the different dynamics of race and discrimination and power and gender, and what it looks like to navigate all of that, to rediscover yourself and to challenge, I guess, these like unequal and unjust systems and systemic issues that exist in our society. It's not particularly thick. You can see it's pretty thin, so I guess it can be a relatively easy read. But again, this seems to be one of those books that you might need to take a break in between to digest a lot of what's happened, or it might help you reflect on like your own experiences of whether it's like racism or like racial inequity, discrimination. So I'm really hoping that this is nice and powerful. It has a lot of good reviews. This author has a lot of good reviews. And the way that I understand it, his way of writing is quite lyrical and poetic, and it's not my favorite style of writing, but I think in the context of this premise, that could be a really powerful way of writing. And because it's not my favorite way of writing, I don't see myself like rushing to get to this book. Again, I think I have to be in the right frame of mind to get to this book, because I want to do it justice. I don't want to read it when I need to read something else and then feel bored by it. So I am looking forward to getting to this. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but sometime in the next few weeks or months for sure. All right, everyone, that's it. Those are all the books that are on my TBR that are by BIPOC authors, at least as of mid-January 2023. I'm always adding more to this pile, so I'll keep sharing any updates. If you have read any of these books or planning to read them, please share your thoughts below in the comments. I would love to chat with you about what are your perceptions of any of these books before you go in. And if you've had like a lovely experience or maybe a not so lovely experience with one of these books, still let me know. I'll still read them to form my own opinion, but I think it'll be nice to hear everyone else's thoughts around them. Thank you so much for watching this video and for joining me here. I upload new videos every Sunday and every Thursday. So hit the subscribe button and like this video if you enjoyed it. Thanks.